You're about to witness a moment the media never expected, and a courtroom will never forget. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas thought he was delivering the final blow, silencing Jasmine Crockett with a gavel and a 10-year suspension from office. But what happened next left the entire room and the country staring in stunned silence. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She pulled out one envelope and exposed a truth the bench wasn't ready for. This isn't just a political scandal. It's a reckoning, a moment when one woman dared to confront unchecked power with calm, calculated courage. If you care about justice, if you believe in truth over tradition, this story will leave you speechless too. Stay with us, because what Jasmine did next rewrote the rules. Like, subscribe and share, because the truth needs an audience now more than ever. This isn't drama. This is democracy on trial. It began, as most quiet attacks on democracy do, not with sirens or chaos, but with a single cold sentence typed in bureaucratic gray. You are hereby ordered to appear before the Federal Ethics Board at 9 a.m. No subject line, no attachments. Just a summons dropped into Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's inbox at 1:02 a.m., the kind of hour when even Washington's wolves are asleep. And that's how she knew something wasn't right. She had done nothing wrong, nothing hidden. But she also knew nothing about this was about the truth. She arrived alone just before sunrise. The wind clawed at her coat. The marble steps of the courthouse hadn't thawed from last night's frost. A few reporters already lingered by the curb, noses red from the chill, clutching their coffee like shields. No one said it aloud, but they knew. This wasn't going to be a normal hearing. Inside, the walls were quieter than usual. Too quiet. No laughter, no legal banter, just tension coiled like a snake under every breath. Then Jasmine saw him. Clarence Thomas. Robed, seated, towering over the bench like a symbol pulled straight out of a civics textbook. Only this wasn't a Supreme Court case. This wasn't a federal appeal. This was a disciplinary ethics hearing for a sitting Congresswoman. And it had suddenly become something far more dangerous. Jasmine walked into the chamber with nothing but her grandmother's Bible tucked in her coat pocket, a folder of facts, and her head held high. No staff, no entourage, just purpose. Justice Thomas didn't nod, didn't blink. He simply said, "We'll begin." He called it a hearing, but it wasn't. It was an ambush with cameras. Within seconds, her name was read out. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stands accused of misappropriating charitable funds through the Hope Forward initiative. Hope Forward, a program that had fed 5,000 children during the pandemic, provided shelter for veterans, delivered medicine to seniors who couldn't afford bus fare, let alone prescriptions. She opened her mouth to speak. "Congresswoman, this is not a forum for posturing," Thomas snapped. He said the word posturing like it was poison, like it was a sin for a black woman to defend her name in a room full of marble, robes, and legacy. Jasmine tried again. "I would like the opportunity to—" The gavel slammed. "You are not here to perform." Gasps echoed faintly. A few aides shifted uncomfortably. A reporter's fingers froze over their keyboard. One young man in the gallery whispered, "She hasn't even said anything yet." Jasmine looked around the room. She wasn't shocked. She had grown up in rooms just like this. Rooms where the rules were rewritten when people like her walked in. She remembered being 16, pulled over while walking home from work, a shift at a diner, a to-go box of fries for her brother still in her hand. 2 white officers told her she fit a description. No charges, no apology. Just a night in holding and the long walk home when they let her go. This wasn't new. This wasn't even clever. It was power doing what power does, expecting silence. So she sat. Not because she accepted it, but because sometimes silence is not surrender, it's strategy. And as the gavel struck again, Thomas read aloud the judgment. Suspension from public office, effective immediately, barred from seeking election for 10 years. The breath left the room. It didn't even sound real. 10 years, no trial, no witness, no defense, just a political execution in judicial clothing. And Jasmine? She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She looked up calmly and stared at the seal of the United States behind the judge's chair. And that's when something changed. In that moment, she knew what they didn't, that they had picked the wrong woman to try to silence. Jasmine Crockett sat motionless as the courtroom buzzed around her. Clerks shuffled papers. Reporters whispered into their recorders. The public gallery thinned as some attendees assumed the fireworks were over. But Jasmine knew better, because there's a stillness, a certain kind of stillness, that only comes before a storm. The kind of silence when your ancestors lean in. When the weight of injustice becomes too heavy for heaven to ignore. She had seen it before. She'd felt it before. The night they cuffed her at 16. The morning her mentor was fired without cause. The afternoon a landlord looked her in the eye and told her he didn't rent to women like her. But this time, the eyes of a nation were watching. And this time, she had something they didn't see coming. As the court clerk leaned over to whisper something to Clarence Thomas, Jasmine's fingers moved, just slightly. She reached beneath her legal pad, slid forward a single envelope, slim, golden, sealed. It had been handed to her just before entering the chamber. No fanfare, no warning. Just a firm grasp from Marcus Hale, her longtime advisor and former campaign attorney. He didn't look her in the eye when he passed it. He didn't need to. Inside was a ledger. And the truth. The truth about trips, private jets, luxury gifts, a timeline. Cross-referenced, documented, lethal. She kept it in her lap. She didn't open it yet, because Jasmine knew the difference between right timing and righteous fury. The latter may be louder, but the former, it never misses. Thomas called for a recess. 15 minutes. Lawyers rose. Reporters dashed for the door. An intern stumbled, dropping his notes. But Jasmine didn't move. She sat, eyes forward, shoulders back, and slowly opened the envelope. There it was. First page, a financial disclosure, or what should have been a disclosure, a trip to the Amalfi Coast. Lodging covered by Harlan Crow, billionaire and longtime associate of Clarence Thomas. 56,800. No entry on his financial forms. Second page, tuition paid for a relative. $13,000, no record. Third page, a Patek Philippe wristwatch. $71,000, delivered by hand. Then the fourth, a timeline overlay. 7 rulings, 5 years, each case tied to Crow Holdings or a related affiliate. Each decision ruled in Crow's favor. And each one within 10 to 14 days of one of the documented gifts. Her hands didn't tremble. Her jaw didn't tighten. Instead, she whispered one word beneath her breath. Gotcha. The courtroom filled back in slowly, but Jasmine had already begun her transformation. Not externally, but in spirit. She wasn't here to protect her reputation. She was here to protect the idea that the law should still mean something. She had grown up reading the Constitution not like a textbook, but like scripture. Because when you come from people who had to fight for every right you now carry, the idea of justice is more than a word. It's sacred. Clarence Thomas looked more relaxed now, as if he believed the performance had ended. But Jasmine had only just begun. "Do you have anything further to add, Congresswoman?" he asked, his voice cool. She stood. Not like someone giving a speech, but like someone preparing to set the record straight for every person who had ever been dragged through mud while the powerful stayed clean. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It settled like a gavel of its own. "I have a brief clarification to submit regarding the record, the accusations, and the selective morality under which this proceeding has been conducted." Thomas leaned forward slightly, uncomfortable. "I'll allow it," he said, begrudgingly. And with that, Jasmine opened the folder. And history shifted. She placed the documents on the desk before her with slow, deliberate precision. The first sheet, a ledger. Her voice rang out. "Your Honor, this document reflects a timeline of undisclosed gifts received by a sitting member of the highest court in our nation." Thomas stiffened slightly but remained silent. "This is a private yacht manifest," she said, showing a $56,800 expense paid by Harlan Crow, tied to a ruling from this bench dated just days later. No disclosure filed. She laid the next document. "This tuition transfer," she continued, "paid in full for a relative, again by the same donor, tied to litigation presented before this bench. No disclosure. No recusal." The room shifted. Reporters leaned forward. Phones glowed as quiet fingers typed rapidly. "Each Justice, she continued. If you will not answer these questions under oath, then perhaps the American people should. Murmurs bubbled from the back rows. A court officer glanced toward the judge for instruction. None came. Jasmine reached for the final page. This is a watch, she said. Patek Philippe, market value $71,000. Delivered, according to a shipping manifest, to your address. The date? She paused. 11 days before a key ruling in a case involving that donor's offshore holdings. She looked directly at Clarence Thomas. This wasn't a lapse in ethics, Your Honor. This is a pattern, documented, cross-referenced, and hidden until now. The silence in the courtroom wasn't stunned. It was stunned into reverence. No one moved. Even the judge's clerks had stopped their note-taking. Jasmine continued, voice now low, but razor-sharp. You barred me from holding office because of disclosed donations to a community program that fed children and housed veterans. But you accepted vacations, tuition, and six-figure gifts without documentation, and you still sit on the highest bench in the land. She stepped back, not in retreat, but to give the moment air. The judge shifted again. His fingers curled slightly. But he didn't speak, and Jasmine leaned into the silence. If this chamber is truly about justice, she said, then I will accept your ruling, not with shame, but with the knowledge that truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. She turned toward the gallery, and I'm not the only one who sees it now. Reporters were standing, phones recording. One camera zoomed in on Clarence Thomas, his expression unreadable, his body still. Jasmine gathered her folder. This wasn't my trial, she said, her voice resolute. It was yours, and you just failed it, in front of the very people who trusted you to uphold the law. With that, she stepped away from the podium. The storm hadn't ended. It had only just begun. For a long breath, no one in the courtroom moved, not the security detail, not the clerks, not even the judge himself. Cameras rolled in deafening silence, and in that moment, the courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like Judgment Day. Clarence Thomas gripped the armrests of his chair, his back hunched just slightly. For decades, he had sat above the law, not as a servant of justice, but as an untouchable monarch wrapped in ceremonial tradition. But now, under the weight of one woman's unshaken truth, his silence betrayed him. Jasmine's words still hung in the air like smoke from a fire that wouldn't burn out. This wasn't my trial, it was yours. And the walls had heard her. The press gallery surged to life. Hands flew up, microphones shifted, flashbulbs fired off like cannon blasts. Congresswoman Crockett, do you plan to appeal? Will you file ethics charges? But Jasmine said nothing more. She lowered her eyes, stepped away from the mic, and walked back to her seat with the quiet composure of someone who had just buried a lie in daylight. Justice Thomas opened his mouth, closed it again, looked toward his clerk, then to the bailiff, then to the exit. He had the gavel, but she had the room, and that terrified him. In the minutes that followed, something began to happen. A ripple, soft at first, like wind through old drapes. The courtroom didn't erupt. It tilted. The power dynamic shifted under everyone's feet. Because Jasmine hadn't shouted. She hadn't stormed out. She hadn't even raised her voice. She had done something far more dangerous. She had stood in the truth and refused to flinch. The moment Justice Thomas attempted to gavel the session closed, an audible cough from the press box sliced through the quiet. Then came a voice. Objection, Your Honor, on grounds of relevance to the record. It wasn't a defense attorney. It wasn't even a politician. It was the Assistant Deputy Counsel of the Department of Justice, a woman named Annalise Renow. She stood up, adjusted her badge, and repeated herself with even more clarity. I respectfully request a temporary recess. The DOJ would like to review the new materials entered into the record by Congresswoman Crockett. Gasps fluttered like moths across the gallery. Justice Thomas looked at her, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, he looked small. Recess granted, he said, but his voice cracked. Jasmine remained seated, hands folded. She didn't celebrate, she didn't smirk. Because this wasn't over. It was unraveling. A storm had been set in motion, and it was now too late for the old guard to contain it. Outside, as the news broke, television screens across the country flickered into emergency coverage. Congresswoman drops bombshell in ethics hearing. Clarence Thomas faces possible DOJ review. Capitol trembles under live ethical scandal. Phones lit up across America. Retired lawyers, law professors, grandmothers who had never missed a C-SPAN session. They weren't just watching. They were waking up. And in living rooms from Detroit to Dallas, from Charleston to Compton, elderly Americans leaned in and whispered to themselves, "I never thought I'd see someone say it out loud." Back inside the courthouse, the air was still, until Jasmine did something no one expected. She stood. Again, not for the judge, not for the press, but for the truth that had carried her here, and she made a quiet request. "May I speak directly to the record?" Thomas nodded, barely. She didn't go back to the microphone. She turned around to face the gallery, to face us. "To the American people watching this," she began, "some of you are angry, some are shocked, some, sadly, aren't surprised at all. But all of you deserve to know this, what you just witnessed, isn't strength, it's fear. The system doesn't come after you when you're irrelevant. It comes when you're effective. And if my silence would have made me safe, I would have been escorted out of here a long time ago with a smile and a handshake." She paused, and then dropped the line that would echo across headlines before nightfall. "I didn't come here to survive this system. I came to make sure it could never hurt another voice again." The courtroom didn't applaud, but it didn't need to, because no one could look away. Even Thomas, hands still clutching the sides of his chair, didn't move. His gavel sat unused, because his authority had left the room hours ago. What remained was only the echo of what he didn't say, and the woman who had dared to say what no one else would. Clarence Thomas didn't slam his gavel. He didn't lift it, didn't even reach for it. Because in the wake of Jasmine Crockett's final words, any sound he made would have felt like defeat. So he sat, frozen in place, the long reigning symbol of authority now reduced to silence by the truth. The camera feed hadn't cut. C-SPAN's red live icon still blinked in the corner of 72 million screens. And America watched as a man who once presided over history was now being redefined by it. Deputy DOJ Counsel Annalise Renow stepped forward again. This time, there was no formality in her tone, no rehearsal in her movement. "This court is no longer fit to proceed without federal oversight," she said. "We request an immediate suspension of this session, pending a preliminary investigation into the conduct and financial disclosures of Justice Clarence Thomas." A flurry of murmurs buzzed from the corners of the gallery. But no one objected, not even the opposing counsel, because the documents Jasmine had laid bare were indisputable. Thomas glanced around, his gaze frantic and searching. But there were no allies to catch his fall, no bench to hide behind. Because now he was the one under review. Jasmine remained quiet. She didn't need to say more. Her silence was no longer weaponized against her. Now it was the sound of strength. Her team huddled quickly. Her attorney leaned over and whispered, "We could adjourn now. Let the DOJ handle it." But she shook her head slowly. "No," she replied. "We finished what they started." The presiding clerk, now unsure whether to look to the judge or the federal official, fumbled with his pen. Jasmine stood again. "I respectfully request that my suspension ruling be stricken from the record due to conflict of interest." She turned toward Thomas and added, "A man who receives private gifts from parties with direct legal interest before his court cannot, under any legal precedent, claim impartiality when punishing others for transparency." That was when Clarence Thomas tried to rise. His hands gripped the bench, but his knees locked. He paused, half standing, half sinking. And then he sat back down. The cameras zoomed in. No gavel, no defense. Just a man undone by receipts. Renow turned to the clerk. "The Department of Justice is filing a motion for immediate review. Until such time, all disciplinary actions issued by this bench are to be held in abeyance." The clerk nodded numbly. So did the courtroom officers. Not a single word came from Thomas. Not a single objection. Because when power realizes it's been exposed, it recoils. The crowd outside had grown massive. Protesters, reporters, veterans holding signs, mothers with their children. One woman held a cardboard placard that read, "Justice doesn't wear watches it didn't earn." Inside, Jasmine gathered her papers, one document at a time. Her pace slow, intentionally calm. A dozen reporters called her name. She walked past them all. Because her words had already done what no headline could, they made the system blink. And now that the gavel had collapsed under its own weight, Jasmine wasn't walking out in shame. She was walking out as a blueprint. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped outside the courthouse, the marble steps felt like a stage, but not for her. They were a platform for the people, the ones who had never seen someone stand toe-to-toe with power and leave it speechless. The crowd parted, not out of fear or security, out of reverence. She didn't speak to the press, not yet. She didn't pose for the cameras. She simply turned to her left, knelt beside an elderly woman in a wheelchair holding a small sign that read, "Truth deserves a voice." Jasmine took her hand, whispered something we'll never hear. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. And just like that, the story stopped being about her. It became about us. That night, the video went viral. Not the one from the courtroom, but the clip of Jasmine walking silently down the steps, refusing to take a victory lap. It played in nursing homes and classrooms, on cable news and handheld phones. The voiceovers were all different, but the emotion, unmistakable. We saw ourselves in her, not because we'd all been to court, but because we'd all been dismissed, interrupted, overlooked. And when she stood, we remembered we could too. The Department of Justice followed through. Within 72 hours, Clarence Thomas was served formal notice of investigation. The documents Jasmine presented weren't buried. They were submitted to the Federal Ethics Board with full digital transparency. And America read them. They saw the dates, the gifts, the decisions. And they didn't ask, could this be true? They asked, why didn't we know sooner? Congress convened a special ethics committee, not just to review the ruling against Jasmine, but to examine judicial immunity altogether. And for the first time in decades, reform bills, real ones, not symbolic ones, began to circulate. One bill carried 3 provisions, each one inspired by the final minutes of Jasmine's testimony. Quarterly public disclosures for all federal judges. Independent ethics oversight boards answerable to Congress, not internal court panels. Whistleblower protections for judicial staff. The bill was co-sponsored by members from both parties, and it was called the Crockett Act. But Jasmine didn't wait for legislation. While Washington scrambled, she went back home. To Texas. To the people who sent her in the first place. She held town halls in school gyms, community centers, union halls, no lights, no makeup, just a handheld mic and a stack of papers. I didn't do this to punish a man, she told them. I did it to protect a system from becoming something it was never meant to be. They nodded, cheered, cried. One man stood in the back row and said, "You didn't just speak truth to power. You reminded it who it works for." Commentators tried to frame the story every which way. Radical transparency. Judicial crisis. A courtroom coup. But the people? They had their own word. Accountability. The kind you can't spin, can't silence, can't unsee. The kind that reminds you we're supposed to be a nation of laws, not loopholes. 6 weeks later, Clarence Thomas submitted a motion for early retirement. No farewell address, no statement of gratitude. Just the signature and silence. He left the bench the same way he left that courtroom, speechless. And the chair he left behind? It no longer carried the same weight. Because now, everyone had seen what it looks like when a robe is used to hide instead of serve. And Jasmine? She kept walking. One night, she was asked at a community forum what she felt in that moment, when the judge tried to stand and couldn't. She paused, then said, "I felt the weight shift, just enough for the rest of us to step forward." This wasn't just about a courtroom, or a judge, or a ruling. This was about a country that needed reminding that no one is above accountability, not even the ones who write it. Jasmine didn't come to win. She came to warn. She didn't come to tear down. She came to rebuild. And she did it with no script, no rage, just facts, grace, and the kind of strength you can't fake. So, if you're watching this, if you've ever doubted whether one voice could matter, remember this story. She didn't yell. She didn't fold. She stood. And the silence that followed wasn't fear. It was respect. like subscribe, share, and comment below. The system works best when it remembers who it's for. Let's keep the pressure on. Let's write the next chapter together.